Salut! You've decided to freelance in France and you've heard about the micro-entrepreneur, auto-entrepreneur. So you're not sure if it's the right fit for you and you'd like to find out a bit more before you make your decision. Now, if so, perfect, because I'm going to give you an overview of the micro-entrepreneur regime and we're going to be looking at the principle of how it works, the activities that are excluded from the micro-entrepreneur, as well as the visas that you would need, the turnover threshold that you need to be taking into account, how the social charges are working, how the income tax is working. I'll be summarizing the advantages and drawbacks of the regime, and finally I'll give you a few tips to make your decision as to whether or not it's a good fit for you. Before we dive in, you might have heard about auto-entrepreneur, micro-entreprise. It's the same thing. France likes to make things confusing. It was initially launched in 2009 as auto-entrepreneur, and then later on the name was changed to micro-entrepreneur, and we even say micro-entreprise. It's all the same thing. The other thing is that this video is longer than the normal videos, the YouTube videos that I make, so you want to make sure you save it so you can watch it later or can come back to it, and believe me, you will want to come back to it. For those who don't know me, I'm Valerie from Start Business in France, and I help expatriates prepare, create, and manage their first business in France. I help them gain control of their business so they can focus on developing their activity and enjoying the new lifestyle in France. Let me explain the principle of the micro-entrepreneur so you decide already if it's a good match and if you want to watch this video until the end. So the micro-entrepreneur is the easiest legal structure to create in France, to create and to manage. It's a sole trader called entreprise individuelle, so there's no distinction between you and the business. You are the business. And the idea with the micro-entrepreneur is that it is a pay-as-you-earn system. So you're going to be paying your taxes as and when you are making some money. And basically, it's on a monthly or quarterly basis. And if you have some sales, you're going to be paying a fixed percentage of your sales. And if you have no sales, you're going to be paying nothing. So every month or every quarter, you'll have to log in onto a specific website and say how much you've cashed in. And based on that, you will be paying a fixed percentage. So the good thing about the micro-entrepreneur is everything is done online. You don't need an accountant, and it is manageable with limited French. Believe me, I've registered hundreds of businesses and you can do it on your own. But the key idea here is your taxes are going to be based on your sales. So if you have no sales, you declare zero and you pay nothing. So this is the closest that you would have in France to what we call a soft launch. Now let's look at the activities that are excluded from the micro-entrepreneur. France is very regulated. We like to split things up, and there are a few activities, unfortunately, that you can't manage as a micro-entrepreneur. And basically it's the farming activities. Well, you might think, well, I'm not a farmer, but if you're a tree surgeon, that's farming. If you're growing fruits and plants and vegetables, that's farming, so you can't be a micro-entrepreneur. For renting furnished premises, as into shops, that's not feasible. For regulated activities such as financial markets, accountant, lawyers, health such as midwife, nurse, that's not possible, as well as insurers. Artistic activities can't register as a micro-entrepreneur. So here I would make the distinction between artists. In France, artists have a very specific setup and it's not considered as a business. It's a specific artistic setup. So whether you're a sculptor, writer, painter, that's not for you. You could register micro-entrepreneur if you're more doing workshops. So artistic workshops are fine, but not pure art. And finally, if you have a gîte and bed and breakfast, but you make less than 5,000 euros per year for bed and breakfast, or less than 23,000 euros per year as a gîte, we would tend to consider this as a secondary source of income, a non-professional business. There's a trick here to be doing it as micro-entrepreneur, and I will explain it later. Looking at visas, French business, if you're a European citizen, perfect, you can register any type of business. Unfortunately, if you are a non-European citizen, you will need a visa that allows you to register a business in France. And if I summarize, we would be looking at Carte de Sejour, entrepreneur, profession libérale from the UK, or for other countries, we'll be looking at Visa Profession Libérale, which is the easiest one to get for 1 year. Visa Talent, a bit harder to get, but this one is for 4 years, but you have to invest 40k in the business. Visa Vie Privée et Famille, if you're the lucky spouse of a European citizen or your spouse has a Visa Talent, or if you're a student and you're at least at the master's level. Let's look at how the macro entrepreneur is working. So I'm going to mention to you a few taxes and turnover threshold. Don't you worry, I've added a link in the comments with my macro entrepreneur fact sheet that you can download so that you have all these tables. You don't have to write notes, you'll have everything summarized in there so you can see which activity you're under, which kind of taxes you're going to be paying. It's much easier. Just save the video or download the link later on with the macro entrepreneur fact sheet. Before I give you a few more information, I want to clarify a few terms to avoid confusion in French. Now, turnover is called in France le chiffre d'affaires, les ventes or les recettes, and it refers to your total sales cashed in with your macro entrepreneur. With that regime, whenever we're going to be talking about taxes, it's how much you've cashed in over the month or over the quarter. So always try to avoid using the term revenue, especially if you are from the US. In French, when we talk about revenue, especially if you do speak to an accountant or your bank manager, whenever you mention revenue, in French, we think income tax, l'impôt sur le revenu. Revenu is actually the income that you get out of your business, and it's completely different from the turnover, the sales, because sales is how much you've cashed in terms of sales, while the income or revenue is how much you got out of the business once you paid all your taxes and your expenses. So avoid using revenue, just use turnover, chiffre d'affaires, vente or recette. Missing the two just means that you're going to get your taxes mixed up, or you think you've understood your accountant and actually you were talking about the wrong base to start with. If I go about the micro entrepreneur principle, so as I mentioned earlier, the micro entrepreneur is a sole trader, entreprise individuelle. And the regime, think of regime as a diet, is micro-entrepreneur. So the regime is how you're going to be paying your taxes. So the business is registered under your name as a sole trader, which means in terms of legal terms, whenever you look at your official business papers, the official name is your name and surname. But you could add a trading name called nom commercial. Having a sole trader can be scary because basically it means that there's no distinction between the business and you. You are liable for the debts generated by the business. However, your main property is protected automatically, and also we're going to be using this type of business when we know that the risks are very limited. As I mentioned, the micro entrepreneur is a regime, which means that it is the way we pay taxes, and this regime is a pay-as-you-earn system, which means that you will be only paying taxes whenever you make some sales. If you make no sales, you have no taxes, but you still have to declare, otherwise you could get a penalty fee of 46 euros for missing a declaration. So basically, every month or every quarter, you'll be checking how much you've cashed in, not your profit, how much you've cashed in, and you'll be paying a fixed percentage of this, and it can be either just the social charges or the social charges and the income tax. Social charges in France means the taxes that you're paying that are going to go towards your health, your pension, the training fund, and the French system. Income tax, impôt sur le revenu, is different. It's a personal tax. So social charges are taxes paid by the business, while income tax, impôt sur le revenu, it's you as an individual, the taxes that you're paying on the income that you are getting. And this income could be your business income, it could be a pension, it could be a salary, it could be some rental income. In terms of activities in France, we tend to have three major activities. So we have what we call the activité commerciale, whether you're buying to resell, e-commerce, shop. These are the activités commerciales, and for those, you're going to be paying 12.3% of your sales towards your social charges. So for now, I'm just focusing on the social charges. I don't talk about income tax. I'm talking about the main business tax, social charges that you are paying to yourself. The second one is activité artisanale. So activité artisanale is manual. If you're providing some manual services, your social charges will be 21.2% of your sales. And if you are what we call une activité libérale, profession libérale, these are when you're providing some intellectual-based services, so more when you're working as a coach, consultant, your social charges rate will be 21.1% of your sales. Let's say I have some e-commerce and I'm selling some goods for 150 euros. I sold once, I'm going to be paying 12.3% on that. If I had some expenses related to that, to the purchase of this good, I can't deduct my expenses. It's based on my turnover. Let me take an example. I'm going to be talking about Patricia, who works as a community manager. She sent an invoice last month for 2,000 euros, which was paid in dollars in the US. So that is possible, but whenever she makes a declaration, she'll have to say the amount that was cashed in euros on that day, and then she will be paying 21.2% of that amount in terms of social charges. As you can see with this regime, you can't deduct your running expenses. It doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile, because it actually works well for activities where you have a high margin. So all the services, all the intellectual activities where you have very little expenses, it is a good match. For people actually selling manual goods, you have to check out how much expenses you have to double check with another regime to make sure you're not losing on money. And later on, I will explain how you can look into this. As a micro entrepreneur, you want to keep a tab of your turnover for 3 reasons. The maximum turnover threshold that you can have as a micro entrepreneur, the silly Prorata rule that applies in the first year in business, and finally, for the VAT threshold. So first of all, let's look at the maximum turnover that you can have as a micro entrepreneur. So basically, you can stay as a micro entrepreneur for as long as you want, provided you don't go above a specific turnover threshold. And again, if you download my micro entrepreneur fact sheet, the link is in the comment, and you can have these numbers so it's easier for you to view. So first of all, if you are an activité commerciale, so you have a shop, e-commerce, gîte, your maximum turnover per year, we're talking about calendar year, 1st of Jan to the 31st of December, is 188,700 euros. So if you go above this turnover, you will have to come out of the micro entrepreneur, which means that the year after, you'll be switched to a different regime called régime réel simplifié, or you will want to move to a French incorporated business. Whether you are artisan or whether you're a profession libérale, so activité artisanale, activité libérale, your maximum yearly turnover is 77,700 euros. So that's the maximum that you can cash in if you want to remain as a micro entrepreneur. As soon as you go 1 euro above, you kicked out, you switch to réel simplifié on the 1st of June the following year. Now, something that you really have to pay attention to and have to wave to make sure you do listen to this, very important for your first year in business. There's a really silly rule called the Prorata rule, and it basically means that that maximum turnover I've given you is for a full calendar year. So if you're only halfway through the year, you can only do half of that. So you really have to keep a track of your turnover. So for instance, let's say I'm a marketing consultant. The maximum turnover I can do for a full year is 77,700 euros. If I start the 1st of July, then I just have half the year, half the amount for the year. So it could be tricky, but one trick for this is actually that you're getting closer to the maximum turnover you can invoice this year, and we're getting towards the end of the year. Just postpone one invoice to the 1st of Jan so that you remain within the maximum authorized turnover threshold if you feel that as a regime that is very suitable for you and very convenient to manage. So that's the key thing to be paying attention to. That Prorata rule is really silly. Now the last turnover threshold that you want to be paying attention to, and again the numbers are in my micro entrepreneur fact sheet, is the VAT threshold. So in Europe, we pay VAT, taxe sur la valeur ajoutée, or value added tax. It's a tax that we collect and give to the government. So when you go above a certain turnover, you have to start collecting VAT and pay to the state. So the maximum turnover threshold I've given you, 77,000 euros for artisan and profession libérale, and 188,000 for activité commerciale buy to resell. At that level, you have gone over the VAT threshold. So before, you have to keep a tab of this first turnover threshold to decide whether or not you mind becoming VAT registered. Again, it's France, so it's never easy. We've got 2 rules for the VAT. We have a first threshold for your first year in business when we say, if you go over this, that's done, you have to become VAT registered. And from your second year in business, we give you a bit of a leeway, and where we say, oh, you've been a bit naughty, but provided you don't go above this, you can still remain non-VAT registered. So basically, in terms of your first year in business, and when I say first year in business, it's calendar year. So if you register 1st of June, your first calendar year is still 1st of June to 31st of December. As soon as we start a new calendar, it's your second year in business, although between you and me, yes, for me and you, we think of a full year as June to June, but for the French taxes, we always talk about calendar year. So, first year in business, if you don't want to become VAT registered, if you have activité commerciale, so buy to resell, e-commerce, gîte, the what we call the seuil de base, the turnover that you can't go above if you don't want to be VAT registered, is 91,900 euros. And for activité commerciale, activité libérale, so your seuil de base, the turnover you can't go above for the first year if you don't want to be VAT registered, is 36,800 euros. Really, to me, you really want to keep a tab of your turnover. At the end of the month, you want to know how much you've cashed in. Again, we're talking about the amount you've cashed in. If you have an invoice for 5,000 euros which is outstanding and hasn't been paid, that doesn't count. We talk about recettes. Les recettes means the money you've cashed in. Now, you are in your second year in business, and now you've got a bit more of a leeway. From your second year in business, we have what we call the seuil majoré, the slightly increased rate, where we say, okay, in between these two, you're a bit naughty, but if you don't go above, you don't become VAT registered. So the seuil majoré from your second calendar year in business for activité commerciale is 101,000 euros, and for activité artisanale profession libérale is 39,100 euros. Which means that if you stay below this, you don't become VAT registered. As soon as you go €1 above, you have to start charging VAT, and you have to speak to me or an accountant because the VAT rates vary according to your activity. The average one is 20%, but some people for restoration is 10%, and some other activities, which is pretty more rare for paper and etc., is 5.5%. Okay, I can see your head going, ooh, this is getting confusing. If I summarize so far, we just know that the micro-entrepreneur is a pay-as-we-go system, so we're going to be paying taxes whenever we cash the money in, and we want to be paying attention to our added turnover so far in the year, so that we know when we might go over the VAT threshold and we have to start charging VAT to our customers, and when we might go outside of the micro-entrepreneur regime and we might be kicked out. So that's what we want to be paying attention to. I'm not going to go too much into VAT, that's too much, but if you want to ask me questions, you can book a power hour with me, or you can join the Start Business in France forums. I can ask, or I can answer your questions all year. Now, looking at the income tax. So the income tax is a personal tax. That's not a business tax, it's a personal tax. It's the money that you're going to be paying to the French state on the income that you've earned in France. So it could be a salary, it could be a business income, it could be rental income, it could be a pension. For the micro-entrepreneur, I'm going to keep it super simple here. And again, you'll find the rates in the micro-entrepreneur fact sheet in the comments. So for the micro-entrepreneur, when you register your business, you have two options. First option is called impôt libératoire, and basically this is when you're going to be paying an extra percentage of your sales to go towards your income tax. And really, we're talking about income tax on the income that is coming out of your business. So for instance, if you are a profession libérale, if you opt for impôt libératoire, it means that you will be paying an extra 2.2% of your sales towards your income tax. If you're an artisan, you have manual activities, it would be 1.7% of your sales. And if you are commerçant, buy to resell, gîte, and so on, it would be 1% of your sales. So basically, some people do this because it just means it's easier, it's done and dusted, I've paid my taxes, don't have to worry about it. But remember, it's the income tax on your business income. If you have some other sources of income, you have some rental income, you have a pension, you have a salary, those are will also be taxed to income tax, so it may not be the right option for you. So I would say impôt libératoire is for those of you who want to get rid of all the taxes, they know it's done and dusted, or you might have a visa or carte de séjour that you want to renew, and it's a nice way to say, okay, here's the proof that I've paid my social charges, here's the proof I've paid my income tax. It's a nice thing to tick. The second option for the income tax is to actually go for the régime micro. France is confusing. You can have micro BIC if you buy to resell, or micro BNC if you're providing some other services. And with this one, basically, you're going to be declaring and paying your income tax 1 year later as part of your French income tax. You'll be doing that later, and basically a nice way to remember how much to save, you just use those rates, just save that, and that should be enough to do it 1 year later. How do you know which one to choose? I would say that somebody who's building a business from scratch. You brand new activity, you don't have customer base. The régime micro 1 year later is best because otherwise you're going to be paying too much. If you have a good level of activity, if you have a visa or carte de séjour that you need to renew, impôt libératoire is nice because at least you're ticking the box of starting to pay some personal income tax and you have proofs. So whenever you get to renew your visa and carte de séjour, you can show up to date with social charges, up to date with income tax. So far so good. You might have to rewatch some of this video to make sense of the whole system. But now the question is, what are the advantages and drawbacks of the micro-entrepreneur regime? Well, first of all, the advantages, the micro-entrepreneur is just super easy to register. I have a micro-entrepreneur registration service. If you need my help, I will take over and handle this for you. And it's easy to manage as well. It's much easier than with the French incorporated business, and you can manage this type of business without an accountant and with limited French because it's all online, so you could just put Google Translate or the automatic translation and manage it on yourself. The other advantages is that the accountancy rules are super easy. It's whatever is coming in and whatever is coming out. So you have to keep a track of what's coming in by having invoices and what's coming out by keeping receipts. And you have two books to keep. One is called Livre des Recettes and it's everything that's coming in. And Livre des Achats is what's coming out. You don't need an accountant. You can manage it with it yourself, whether it's your first ever freelancing business in any country or whether it's your first one in France and you've had others in other countries. You can do it. And I also have a course called Manage Your Micro-Entrepreneur where I actually teach you how to handle your micro-entrepreneur, how to create all your online accounts, how to do your turnover declarations, how to do your income tax declaration, and so on. The other advantage of the micro-entrepreneur is that it is it's a fixed percentage of social charges. So there's no surprises. In the past, you might have heard horror stories about people who had huge bills, social charges they weren't expecting. It's with a different regime called Régime Réel Simplifié, where we pay a start of social charges and we have one lump sum later. So if you don't know how to calculate those, that's a sure way to go into a big nightmare because you have a huge bill at the end. With a micro-entrepreneur, it's a fixed percentage of whatever you're cashing in. So you can always know how much you're going to be paying. There's no bad surprises. The other advantage to me is trying your market, testing your market, the soft launch, because there's if you have no sales, you have no taxes. That's the best part. So if your activity is very seasonal and in the winter you have nothing, for instance, a gîte where you might have retreats or language stays and so on, and it's super busy in the summer, but in winter you have no one. Well, at least in the winter, you don't pay taxes, and in your peak season, you pay a fixed percentage of that. So it is the best tool or the ideal tool to test your market in France. And it's also a good fit for a first-time freelancer, whether it's a first-time freelancer full stop or a first-time freelancer in France. Now, what about the drawbacks of the micro-entrepreneur, Valerie? You keep raving about it. What is bad about it? First thing is that with the micro-entrepreneur, you have a limited turnover. I mentioned the threshold, 77,000 euros for profession libérale-ish, 188,000 euros-ish for buy-to-resell. So there is a cap as to how much you can cash in. However, it's a first step to test your market, see how you're getting on. And the idea is that after a few years, because you're in control of your activity, you feel comfortable with it, you will be ready to move to a different type of French business, whether it's entreprise individuelle réel simplifié or French incorporated business, because at the time you will know who does what and how the taxes work. The other downside is that you are liable on your personal assets. So as I mentioned, there's no distinction between you and the business, which means that if you run into debts, you have to pay those debts. Now, two things here is that in 2022, I think, or 2021, President Macron changed things so that your main home is automatically protected. There's no legal documents to do. With a notaire, it's automatically protected. And the second thing is basically you're going to go for micro-entrepreneur when you can control the potential or the risk that you might go into this. If you're providing some services, you're not going to be having suddenly a huge bill that you don't expect. And if you do buy to resell or e-commerce, same thing, you're going to be going for this activity when there's no risk of running into debt. Other drawbacks from the micro-entrepreneur is that you cannot deduct your expenses. If you have employees, you're renting some premises, you have a lot of stock to buy, it may not be the best fit for you. I will show in a moment how to check whether or not it's the best fit for you. So I would say that the micro-entrepreneur doesn't work well if you have a low margin. It's for people who have a high margin. And the other thing about the micro entrepreneur, it's a sole trader, which means that you can't have a business partner. If you have an associate, you're looking into a French incorporated business. The only person that could work with you as a micro entrepreneur, if you're married or if you have a civil union, un PAX, then you could have a collaborating partner, conjoint collaborateur, because you're married or you have a civil union. If you want to work with a best friend or with a partner, then you're looking into a different business type. You're going to be looking at incorporated businesses. So how do you check if the macro entrepreneur is a good fit? I just mentioned that as a macro entrepreneur, you can't deduct your expenses. So to me, the first thing that you're going to be looking into if you have some expenses is to compare your expenses with what the tax office is assuming to be your expenses. What are you talking about? Well, I did mention the fixed percentage rate of social charges, but when URSSAF, the body collecting your social charges, and tax office did come up with those percentages, they actually looked at the average types of businesses and saw an average level of running expenses. So for instance, if you're a profession libérale, they assume that 34% of your sales are your running expenses, social charges plus your business fixed expenses. If you're providing some commercial services or an artisan or a gîte, but you're not classified with VAT France, they assume that 50% of your sales is your business expenses, social charges, and running expenses. And if you're buy to resell, so you e-commerce shops, or you have a classified gîte with VAT France, they assume that 71% of your turnover is your business expenses, social charges, and fixed expenses. So what does it mean? You never apply, watch it, listen. You never apply this rebate yourself, but basically just know that in the background, when they came up with the social charges rate, that's what they assumed. They assumed that if you're profession libérale, there's 22.1% of social charges and the remaining amount is your fixed expenses, and so on for the others. So basically, if you look at your business expenses, you know your social charges rate I've mentioned, look at your other fixed expenses and add them up. Is it above this rate that I just mentioned, or is it below? If it's about that or below, or for instance, you're a profession libérale, usually we don't have much expenses, internet access, a couple of software. If you can see that your running expenses is like 30, 31, 34, 35, I said macro entrepreneur is a good fit because that's the amount that they assume in general. If on the opposite, you were doing lots of subcontracting, work with other people, and your running expenses was more about 50%, macro entrepreneur won't fit. If you have a gîte, or if you have if you buy to resell or a shop, if your running expenses is about 71%, micro entrepreneur is a good fit. If it's below, even better. Well, if it's above, we would be looking at a different business type or business regime. How do you decide if the micro entrepreneur is a good fit? Well, first of all, it's a question of are you starting from scratch, or do you already have a good level of activity? And I would say that if you're starting from scratch, building a business from scratch, the micro entrepreneur is good because of that test and trial. You only pay taxes when you earn some money, so that is good. Second thing as well is if it's your first time in France, you want to get into the French system and it's too much to take in, or you want to quickly have paperwork to renew your visa in a year's time, micro entrepreneur is usually a very good fit because it's the one that gives you the most paperwork to prove how much you've earned into an easy way. And finally, the last way to look into it, which is more advanced, so you need numbers to look into this one, but it's basically to look at your running expenses. And voila, we've gone through the micro entrepreneur regime, and I hope that you feel more confident about it. Don't forget to download your micro entrepreneur fact sheet, and I also have a mini course that goes into this in a bit more detail. If you need extra help, you can book a power hour with me so we can talk about your situation, make sure it's a good fit, and see what we would recommend and how it would work. And if you say, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to rock and roll, you can also use my micro entrepreneur registration services, where I'm going to be taking over the process for you. I will be advising you on the taxes, and for a month I'm going to help you with the paperwork that you will be receiving to help you sort it out. Voilà, à bientôt!